Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes the strangest things in the universe aren't in black holes or in quantum mechanics, but swimming in an aquarium? Have you ever heard of a little creature that has such a simple brain, so simple that it seems to have been designed in 5 minutes, but it manages to do things that leave philosophers, neuroscientists, and consciousness theorists completely confused? That's right. Today we're going to talk about the planarian, this aquatic worm of just a few millimeters that is messing with the heads of everyone who studies philosophy of mind. And it will serve as a gateway to an even more radical discussion. The idea that minds may not be created by bodies, but that bodies function as interfaces for patterns of the mind that already exist in a non-physical space. Calm down, I know it sounds far-fetched, but hold on tight, we'll go step by step. The planarian has what we would call a proto-brain. Instead of hemispheres, cortex, frontal lobe, it has 2 small clusters of neurons, connected by fibers, forming a simple, almost symmetrical circuit with about 10,000 neurons. Just to compare, we have about 86 billion. But despite this simplicity, the planarian learns, forms memories, recognizes environmental patterns, detects light, smell, vibrations, and coordinates all of this in an integrated way. That alone would be interesting, but there's a detail that makes everything even stranger. If you cut the planarian in half, it regenerates its body and also its brain and continues to remember things it learned before. Yes, its memory survives the disappearance of its own brain. And that already ties any philosopher's head in knots. But it gets even better. Imagine the situation. You teach a planarian to make a maze. Then you cut it in half. It regenerates a brand new brain, and when you put it back in the maze, it still knows the way. And then the question arises, how can memory survive without the brain? This is the part where scientists start to break out in a cold sweat, because this challenges several traditional notions. The Aristotelian idea that the soul is the form of the body, the Cartesian idea that mind and body are distinct substances, the contemporary idea that memory is stored in specific neural networks, and even modern materialism, which presupposes that all experience depends directly on a fixed neural substrate. If the planarian loses its brain but doesn't lose its memory, something is missing from our model. This means that some form of information, perhaps a bioelectrical pattern, perhaps body structure, is functioning as an extracerebral cognitive support. This opens up space for alternative conceptions, such as the mind as a more distributed process, extracerebral memory, information as a basic property of nature, as Chalmers suggests when discussing panpsychism and proto-phenomenality. Or perhaps the regenerated neurons read some mark left on the entire body. The planarian forces us to think about a mind without a center, without a localized self, something closer to ancient conceptions, such as those of pre-Socratic philosophers who understood the soul as a kind of harmony or vital flow, and not as something tied to a specific organ. David Chalmers, in his book The Character of Consciousness, discusses the famous hard problem of consciousness. Why do certain biological processes give rise to subjective experience? The planarian doesn't solve the hard problem. It worsens it. This is because some cognitive processes that we associate with experience appear in a creature that seems too simple to harbor anything resembling consciousness. And then 2 equally uncomfortable possibilities arise. Either consciousness is much simpler than we imagine, Perhaps any biological circuit capable of integrating information already generates a type of minimal experience. Either we are projecting complex cognition where it doesn't exist, but then we would have to explain memory regeneration, and good luck with that. And there's something else. The neural structure of the planarian resembles, in a certain sense, the ancient ancestor of our own brain. Some articles, such as "The Brain of the Planarian as the Ancestor of the Human Brain," argue that studying the planarian is almost like looking at a primitive version of our nervous system. So perhaps some original cognitive abilities, like learning, integrating stimuli, forming preferences, already existed before anything resembling a cortex emerged. This means that the line between organisms with a mind and organisms without a mind is much more blurred than we would like to admit. Get ready, because now it gets really philosophical. Physicalism is incomplete, not because it lacks some mysterious physical constant, but because reality is full of free patterns, mathematical structures, logic, forms that influence the physical world, but are not determined by the physical world. Think of prime numbers, fractals, constants like pi or Feigenbaum, geometric rules, universal computational patterns. They exist independently of the physical universe. They wouldn't change if the Big Bang were different. And yet they shape everything, from turbulence to genetics, from circuits to morphogenesis. The proposition is this: these mathematical patterns function as formal causes that influence life and mind. And now comes the truly surprising part. Just as there are mathematical patterns, there are also patterns of mind, Platonic forms that bodies embody. And this is where the planarian becomes the protagonist of philosophy. So what we have is that biological bodies, machines, biobots, robots, even AI systems do not create minds. They function as pointers to patterns of the mind that already exist in a space of forms, as if the body were the door through which certain cognitive patterns enter the physical world. This is a modern reinterpretation of Platonism, but with practical consequences. The body, including the brain, does not produce mind, it gives access to it. Just as simple equations trigger complex fractals, a brain, even a primitive one, can trigger a type of mind. And then you understand why the planarian creates so much trouble. It regenerates the body, changes the brain, but the mental pattern remains accessible. It is, literally, an organism that points to a persistent cognitive pattern not located in tissues. This view has enormous implications. Morphogenesis is cognitive, and cells collectively decide body forms. The development of the body and mind follows similar principles. Bodies are incomplete interfaces. Each body accesses a subset of possible patterns. Changing the body changes the type of mind accessed. There is no clear boundary between life, machine, and mind. Biobots, robots, and organisms are just different ways of accessing cognitive patterns. Emergence is not the end of the explanation. Emergent patterns are just visits from stable forms of this Platonic space. The planarian is an experimental clue to this theory, because it literally reorganizes the body and continues to exhibit the same mental pattern. It is literally an organism that points to a persistent cognitive pattern not located in tissues. The planarian as living evidence for a new paradigm. The planarian then becomes a symbol of a larger model, where the mind is not created by biology, but accessed through it. And the fact that it regenerates both the body and cognition indicates that the cognitive pattern is independent of neural architecture. This places the planarian on the border between regenerative biology, philosophy of mind, information theory, and metaphysics.
Aristotle thought the heart was the center of the mind. The Stoics thought the soul was a breath distributed throughout the body. Plotinus imagined a layered mind that extended throughout the cosmos. Today, with the planarian, these ideas seem less absurd. If it can store memory in the body, if it can reorganize its nervous system, if it thinks in its own way without a fixed center, then perhaps the human mind is just a highly complex version of a much older pattern. The mind as an emergent process, distributed throughout the organism. This view connects with inactivist theories, where mind emerges from body-environment interaction, theories of consciousness as information integration. Ecological and socio-cultural approaches show that cognition isn't just in the head, as we saw in the texts about culture influencing children's play. And even systemic approaches treat behavior as a network, not as a controlling center. The planarian is, literally, an organism whose mind is a reorganizable network. And that says a lot about how we ourselves think. But the truth is, the planarian is exactly on the border where the philosophy of mind loses its footing. It's too simple to have consciousness, but too complex to have nothing. What the planarian forces us to reconsider. In the end, studying the planarian may not be about worms, but about ourselves, how minds arise, how bodies shape cognition, and whether consciousness is something that emerged or something that has always been there, waiting for a biological structure to manifest itself. Perhaps the planarian is our evolutionary reminder that the mind is not the property of a complex brain, but a deep, ancient pattern inscribed in the very fabric of reality, and that we, like it, are just one of the many ways in which these patterns can express themselves. So, next time you look at an aquarium worm, remember, there may lie one of the greatest enigmas of the philosophy of mind, swimming peacefully, as if nothing were happening.